So Nigel Farage appeared on the Today programme this morning. Nigel Farage, remember him? Quiet, well-spoken, reliable sort of chap, as good as his word.
Kind Nigel Farage.
Remember, say his name 3 times and a mountain made of bullshit will appear.
Is in Wales this morning, where I am for the launch of Reform's contract, as they call it. They say the word manifesto is too much linked in people's minds with lies, and comes, of course, as polls suggest, that Reform is on the up and the Conservatives are worried.
Yep, the Conservatives are worried, not necessarily about Reform, about their jobs in general. The cushy gravy train is coming to a stop, and if you have a look at the dumpster outside Conservative Party head office, it's full of old Andrex wrappers, air freshener and wet wipes.
If you are elected yourself, and if Reform do well at this election, what is the plan?
My plan personally is to go and live in a cave on the hills and forage for berries until they've disappeared.
What does it do to our politics?
It gives us a voice of opposition.
Yeah, but we need a quality opposition. We don't need somebody who's just going to be contrarian simply because there's a few quid in it for them.
The Conservative Party have been incapable of agreeing on anything in government, let alone what the recriminations are going to be after they've suffered a huge defeat. And I mean, even this weekend, we've seen Suella Braverman saying, Nigel should join the Conservatives, David Cameron saying he's ghastly.
It's a very interesting thing that him, Trump and a couple of other right-wingers tend to refer to themselves in the third person. It's all very well wanting to distance yourself from somebody who has abhorrent or distasteful or disgusting views, but disassociating yourself from yourself is, well, psychologically interesting.
They can't agree on anything, they're split down the middle, and we know what we stand for.
Unfortunately, almost everyone knows what you stand for, Nigel, and nobody likes it, apart from a small clique of people who've had their cerebral cortex severed in some horrific accident.
We know what we believe in, and for democracy to function properly, there needs to be a proper voice of opposition.
But that's where the whole argument falls down, isn't it? Because even if you do have a good, solid, sensible and wise opposition, if it's facing a stonking majority, it might as well just be in a shopping centre with a carrier bag with his trousers around his ankles shouting about socialism. I'm just checking I haven't infringed on Reform's copyright.
And our plan, and this is our first big election as a party, our plan is to establish that bridgehead.
Bridgehead? That's a new word for you.
In Parliament, and to use that voice to build a big national campaigning movement around the country over the course of the next 5 years for genuine change.
How bad does it have to be that you think Nigel Farage is genuine change, is some sort of improvement? How bad do things have to get before you reach that position? I used to not like Nigel Farage, but since the Volerons of Thargogon 6 started sucking people's eyes out through their rectum, I don't think he's that bad now.
2029, the next election after this one, you would be the head of that. Would that mean that you would be vying at that election to be Prime Minister?
Yes, absolutely.
I just can't understand why they give this man airtime. He's like a discarded Muppet that's come to life. And you look at his actual history. He lied to the country about Brexit. Before that, when he was an MEP, he was brought to book several times for his dubious expense claims. That is, when he bothered to turn up. And when he was in university, he used to march through the town late at night singing Hitler Youth songs. I mean, how bad do you want it?
I was in those 7-way debates, one on the BBC, one on ITV, and
I'm rather pleased he added the word debates in there because it put a rather unpleasant image in my mind for one moment.
the more that Angela Rayner argued with Penny Mordaunt, the more they sounded the same.
That's called debating, Nigel. That's called debating. That's not unusual in politics. That's what happens in politics when you debate with somebody and don't just shout over them with your bigoted, xenophobic, racist and homophobic rhetoric.
There are no real fundamental differences between these two parties.
Can I just pick you up
we
on-
are aiming.
Can I just
we are
pick you
aiming
up
to
on-
be a big party.
Yeah, let me just pick you up. I think there's a slight delay because you're in a radio...
No, it's not because he's in a radio car. It's because he's an ignorant little man who intends to speak over you. You just switch his mic off. It's ridiculous. You've got two voices speaking at once. You can't differentiate what either one is saying. In Nigel's case, not that you particularly want to, but it just sounds rude and messy.
Now, let me just pick you up on this business of your ambition to lead this. You are saying clearly this morning you would want to be Prime Minister, and yet only a few days ago you weren't even going to run for the seat that you're running for. It feels, does it not, as if it's being put together at the last minute, and that actually it could crumble as quickly as it came.
What he's done is he's decided to do this as it becomes unlikely that Donald Trump is going to get elected to office. He had his eyes on a job in the White House, a nice cushy number with a couple of 100,000 a year plus all the backhanders, and he'd be set for life as it happens, or as set for life as these people tend to be, because greed takes over over and they just want more and more and more and more. Now that's looking somewhat unlikely. Now that's looking a little bit more unlikely, and he can't associate himself for reputation and long-term purposes with a 34-time convicted felon. He's decided to get on the gravy train at Westminster. That's the truth of the matter. It's nothing to do with, I want to save the country. You want to save the country? Go.
Well, no, I've made a big decision. I don't need to do this.
Then don't. Then don't. You have a comfortable retirement. You have all your trust funds. You have your money in coots. Don't do it. Live a life of leisure. Go off. Do something else. Somewhere far away. Please, I'm begging you.
I've come out of retirement.
What do you mean retirement? You're going around the world. You're giving speeches in Australia, in America, throughout Europe, to far-right organisations spouting the most appalling things which are not being reported in this country. Go and have a search now on your search engine of choice on speeches that Nigel Farage has made to far-right organisations throughout the world. And you will find that this is a pretty objectionable person.
Because I think there is a huge gap out there between, as I've said already, where the country is and where Westminster is. So I am doing this. I'm making a minimum 5-year commitment.
Blimey, it's a long way round of saying, this is a nice parliamentary democracy you got here. Shame if something happened to it.
You are committed. If you get into Parliament, you are committed as well to leading this centre-right coalition and leading it with the aim of becoming Prime Minister in 2029 or whenever it is.
That is absolutely right.
Imagine that, eh? Nigel Farage as Prime Minister. Well, there you are. It's gone down a little bit better than I expected.
To your friendship with Donald Trump, who tried to overturn a free election, and say, actually, Nigel Farage is not necessarily a Democrat at heart, and his friendship with Trump is part of the proof of that.
Well, I've been around for 30 years. Exactly 30 years ago, I was campaigning in a by-election.
Which you lost.
I was elected to the European Parliament just over 25 years ago.
Which, even by MEP standards, you didn't turn up for most of the time you were actually elected, but managed miraculously to claim expenses and wages. And also the last time you went over there, especially at the expense of the EU, was to pick up the forms for your entitlement to a pension.
So I've been around a long time, and if there was anything in me that was fundamentally anti-democratic, I think you would have discovered it by now.
Well, your friendship with Trump is what some suggest.
Well, hang on. As far as Trump's concerned, of course I want Trump back in the White House. I think.
But why? Because he tried to overturn a democratic election.
Well, that's a matter of opinion.
And now we get into it. The conspiracy theory that January the 6th was justified because Biden stole the votes. This weak, senile old man, as the Republicans would have it, orchestrated such a massive deceit on the American voting system and involved thousands of people, none of whom have actually spoken out.
What happened on January the 6th should not have happened, of that there's no doubt whatsoever. Did he actually urge people to storm the Capitol building? No, he didn't.
You know what stand back and stand by actually means? Those are the words issued by President Trump to the Proud Boys and the rioters on January the 6th. Stand back and stand by.
But the point I'm making is this.
No, hang on a second. Just on Trump, I'll let you get to that point, but just on Trump, to be absolutely clear about this, are you saying that it is a matter of opinion that he tried to overturn a democratic election?
Well, he said go in peace to the protesters, but they didn't.
He also said we're going to march up to the Capitol Hill and I'm going to be heading there with you and you've got to fight like hell to get your country back. That's what he said. He incited those people. He didn't use those words because he's not an incredibly stupid man. He may appear so. He's a greedy, incompetent, lazy little parasite, but he's not a stupid man and he didn't incite them directly. But what he did do is use the old mafia term of saying, nice place you got here. Shame if something happened to it.
He didn't mean go in peace, did he? And he wanted, crucially, he wanted his vice president not to confirm that the election was free and fair. He wanted his vice president to do it, put enormous pressure on him to do it.
Well, I would say enormous pressure does count as people building a gallows and wanting to hang him. Him having to hide in a basement in a secure area because they are coming to hang him.
Do you approve of that or not approve of it?
No, I don't approve of objecting to elections, even though I object to much of what's happening in our system with postal vote corruption and
now, this is quite interesting.
Right,
Years
okay,
ago,
so you're
they
clear
used to
about
say
that. He did lose the 2020 election and he should not have tried to
when they went to
overturn it.
vote. And they brought in
think
these
he lost it
laws
because
and
the law
last
did nothing to
election
prevent
time,
ballot
there was
harvesting,
one
etc.
confirmed case of somebody fraudulently voting. That's 0.0001% of the actual people who were entitled to vote. One case. And they brought in these voter ID things as suppression for people who were more likely to vote against the Conservative and right-wing agendas. Now they've got that in, Farage and his cronies are going on about postal votes.
If you are to be a serious voice of opposition, you will have to deal with problems that are complex. There is no question about that. And I want to put to you something Rachel Reeves has told the Financial Times this morning. So she's absolutely plain about it. She says in her constituency, people voted Leave because it was a matter of immigration. They wanted less immigration and no immigration. That's why they voted Leave.
Although they didn't realise that most of the care sector, the hospitality sector, the tourist sector and the health sector relied on immigration. And all of those sectors have suffered greatly since we left the EU because people have gone home. They did obey what Nigel Farage and his friends said to go home. We don't want you here. So off they went. Were they replaced? No. And then they sit around and complain about it.
But she says, I don't think anyone voted Leave because they weren't happy with it. Chemicals regulations were the same across Europe. And she's talking now about Labour potentially getting closer to Europe when it comes to regulation. So, for instance, in the chemicals industry, but other industries as well, where real people's real jobs are at stake because of the costs that we're either putting on them or thinking of putting on them, are you willing to compromise in those areas? Can you foresee a relationship with the European Union that is actually closer?
Well, this whole debate typifies things, doesn't it? When we talk about business, all we ever talk about are the giant corporates. In this case, you're talking about chemical companies, pharmaceutical companies. There is a huge chunk of the economy that feels betrayed by the way in which the Conservatives have not delivered Brexit.
I disagree. I think they have delivered Brexit. They've delivered the Brexit that they want. They saw a golden opportunity to cash in, demonise certain sections of the population and make a hell of a lot of money out of it. A lot of people who were involved in Brexit have now become multi-millionaires, extremely wealthy, as a direct result of Brexit and the rules that have been brought in. The contracts that have been dished out to people to replace. And people thought, foolishly, we'll kick Cameron in the nuts by voting to leave the European Union. But you weren't kicking Cameron in the nuts. You were giving them more power for austerity, more power for draconian cuts, more power for public services to be withdrawn. And that was the result of Brexit. And a lot of people shorted the pound, and one person made £230 million because the pound ducked like a stone in water as soon as the markets opened on the day after the vote.
And this is where the real engine of growth, income and tax revenues will
you
come
just
from.
let the big companies go hang?
Why don't we talk about small companies?
No, because the very idea is to drive the big companies out of here, so we have to import more stuff, so the prices go up again, small companies can't function, and the entire economy collapses. People who have shorted the pound in those circumstances stand to make billions. And don't think that Nigel Farage has clean hands in this, because he's up to his elbows.
For once.
Well,
let's talk about
both.
the 5.5...
But the big companies are
No, but that's the problem,
people,
Justin. No one ever does. No one ever does. And the Conservatives don't talk about it, and Labour don't talk about it. There are 5.5 million men and women out there doing their best as sole traders or running their own companies. And what we want to do is to lift the VAT threshold. What we want to do is to cut corporation tax back to a sensible rate so that people can reinvest in their businesses.
But we've been down this road before. Remember when we cut corporation tax last time? We cut corporation tax. We slashed it on the premise that companies would increase their investment in Britain. And what did they do? They sold loads of shares and then made bigger payments to their shareholders. That was their investment in Britain. That money going abroad to tax havens, we don't see any of it. And that was the investment that those companies made.
And what we want to do is to get rid of the appalling IR35 rules, making it so difficult now for anybody to be self-employed. They get no sickness benefit, they take hardly any holidays, and that's where the driver of real economic growth is going to come from.
But lots of them
and
also say we'd like to be able to export to Europe more easily.
All Rachel Reeves can do is talk about big corporate businesses the Tories are the same.
And blah, 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 blah. And then he goes on about the usual bluster and subjects of immigration and 20-mile-an-hour speed limits and the NHS and all these usual talking points that he comes out with. You can go and listen to it yourself. It's on BBC Sounds if you want to assault your ears without my constant interruptions. But go and research the Reform UK party, because it's not a good party. They're not good. They're going to cut all welfare benefits. If you're disabled, if you're sick, if you're vulnerable, if you're made unemployed, you're going to get nothing out of the state. They're going to raise the taxes. and basically make this a state where you are in a survival of the fittest situation. I think we're better than that. I think we see people who have various challenges in life, and I think instinctively, as a species, we show some compassion towards those people, and we help those people where we can. And it is getting to the point in this country where Nigel Farage and his cohorts are seeing somebody in a wheelchair as being somehow inherently evil. I don't know. It's up to you what you do. It's your choice. But at the end of the day, if you want to vote for a fascist regime, then you vote for a fascist regime. But don't be surprised if you get a knock on the door sometime soon when they run out of people to pick on.